I never loved my brothers. Sad thing for a man to admit, but it's true. You were the brother I chose.
Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Last year I did a video covering the worst character destructions by Dan and Dave on Game of Thrones. It was a painful excursion into the ridiculousness and stupidity of the final seasons. So now it's time to look at the flip side, the top 5 characters on the show that were not massacred by Benioff and Weiss. This one wasn't very difficult because it's a very short list. So let's dive in. 3 of these characters provided impeccable one-season performances. The other 2 are ones that remain consistent. We didn't have sudden, inexplicable changes in their motivations.
And for every one of the million people in that city, innocent or otherwise.
To be honest, I never really cared much for them. Innocent or otherwise.
They didn't suddenly go stark raving mad for no reason. This doesn't mean characters can't change, but there must be a reason behind it. It can't be crammed in there to meet plot points or because the writers were in some sort of fugue state when the scripts were written. As you probably can already guess, the characters here will be from the first 4 seasons, because starting in season 5, things began to go downhill. Coming in at number 5 is Joffrey Baratheon. He was the character you loved to hate, and played masterfully by Jack Gleeson. Joffrey was weak and cowardly. He was only bold when the men around him, or his position, worked as a buffer to keep anything bad from happening to him. But if he was faced with potential harm, he fled, like during Stannis' attack on King's Landing. He would also always bend to those with confidence or strength.
The king is tired. See him to his chambers.
Come along.
I'm not tired.
We have so much to celebrate.
I'm not tired!
Come.
And it wasn't just due to Tywin's powerful aura. Even the more diminutive Tyrion was able to tower over him.
But first you will get to Lord and Lady Stark, and you will fall on your knees in front of them and tell them how very sorry you are, that you are at their service and that all your prayers are with them. Do you understand?
You can't!
Do you understand?
Joffrey was irredeemable. Even when he died so brutally, you couldn't even feel a shred of sympathy for him, particularly after he had just used his own wedding to exact revenge upon Tyrion. Alone, Joffrey couldn't stand up to him, but before everyone he could taunt and humiliate his uncle. I believe there were only 2 consistently well-written villains in Game of Thrones, and Joffrey was one of them. He was a sick and twisted individual, but we understood his motivations, and the choices he made were always in line with his depraved character. At number 4 is the first of 3 single-season characters. King Robert Baratheon was so memorable because he was greatly flawed, drinking to excess, indulging in all his passions, and by his own admission, he was a terrible king.
After I'm dead, at least they'll say I did this right, this one thing. You'll rule now. You'll hate it worse than I did, but you'll do it well.
But at times he was somewhat sympathetic, longing after the only woman he claims he loved, Lyanna Stark. What's tragic about Robert is that he's a fallen figure. In his prime, the hero on the Trident, who killed Rhaegar Targaryen and later took the throne from Mad King Aerys. After that, it was all downhill for Robert. Yet you're still drawn to him because in the first season, the Lannisters are quickly set up as the antagonists. And this self-indulgent man who hates to be king is the only thing standing between the realm and disaster. And while he's aware of the threat that the last surviving Targaryens in Essos pose, he's blissfully unaware of the parentage of his own children, none of whom look like him. And who's to say whether it's the last vestiges of his pride that wouldn't allow him to even entertain the truth, or just his general decline? Nevertheless, Robert Baratheon stands out as one of the very best characters in the series, and incidentally a fan favorite that has spawned so many great memes too. At number 3 is Robert's friend and final hand of the king, Ned Stark.
He's a serious man, Stannis Baratheon.
Ned Stark was a serious man too. There were very few shades of gray in his thinking. He was loyal to a fault and put principles ahead of himself and his family. His most critical error was to tip off Cersei about him knowing that her children were with Jaime. Due to some sense of nobility or underestimating Cersei, Ned thought he was giving her the opportunity to flee when he just gave his own enemies time to prepare.
When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die.
He was so set on Stannis being the rightful heir that his actions propelled his family into turmoil, and for some of them, eventually death. Everything was set up for him previously, too, with Sansa promised to Joffrey. Cersei and Tywin would have been more than willing to keep House Stark on the side of the Lannisters. But Ned dug in, for a man who he hadn't seen in years, one who had been brought under the influence of a priestess of R'hllor, and would later go on to have her kill his own brother Renly. And speaking of Renly, that was a third path here, aside from Stannis or Cersei. He could have taken Renly up on his offer, providing him with military support to take Joffrey into custody. But he was stuck on Stannis simply because Stannis was Renly's older brother, and that was the way things were supposed to be done. Ned Stark was out of his element in King's Landing. He was the only one following set principles, while everyone else around him was looking for their own self-interest or for their house and was seeking to increase their power. And while it was frustrating to watch his nobility and naivete in the face of so much scheming and treachery, Ned Stark's death, due to him pursuing a purity of purpose, was the most impactful on the show. It told us this wasn't your common hero story. It was a world where duplicity and power reigned supreme. Ned Stark was the heart and soul of Season 1, and then he was just torn away from us. At number 2 is Oberyn Martell. It's no surprise that this was Pedro Pascal's breakout role, that had opened up numerous other opportunities for him. He was the perfect choice for the part. Oberyn was a confident, swaggering, and calculating man who at times had an air of mystery around him. He could also fluctuate from being very nonchalant and then extremely intense, particularly when it came to his desire to seek revenge on the Lannisters. His character entered the show at the perfect time, after the Red Wedding and with the Starks decimated. The audience is drawn to Oberyn's need for vengeance for his sister and her children as a proxy for the deaths of Robb, his wife, and Catelyn. Oberyn is like a force of nature. He impacts everyone he meets. He'll needle some.
You are from Essos. Where? Lys. I have an ear for accents.
I've lost my accent entirely.
I have an ear for that as well.
How did you get here? It's a long story.
One you don't like telling people.
He'll perplex others, or just display attitude and disdain during small council meetings. He's fearless, and it feels as if there's a dormant volcano beneath his cool self-control. But he's also capable of kindness and has a sense of honor. Unlike Ned Stark, Oberyn is skilled in political maneuvering. He knows how to draw things out from people without showing his hand, and waits for the right moment to strike. And in the end, his decision to be Tyrion's champion has all of these characteristics wrapped into one, as he finally seeks his vengeance in a moment not only to kill the man who murdered his sister and her children, but to publicly challenge the Lannisters as well. Oberyn is a quintessential character. You have many conflicting emotions and characteristics, but the writing is so seamless and the performance so immaculate that we never doubt his motivations or actions for a moment.
I will be your champion.
Before I get to number 1, there were a couple of characters that I did consider for this top 5. Both were out of the series after Season 3. Robb and Catelyn Stark didn't suffer the same savage character assassinations of many, but as a book reader, I have a hard time getting around some of the differences between the two versions. It's nothing severe, and while I felt both characters worked, I just couldn't put either one on this list, even though these rankings are based solely on the depictions on the show. Finally, at number 1 is Tywin Lannister. I think even without the destruction of the main cast of Game of Thrones in the final seasons, Tywin would rank at or near the top of any list. Like with Pedro Pascal as Oberyn, you couldn't think of anyone but Charles Dance in this role. He was a commanding presence, the catalyst that brought down Robb and Catelyn and ripped control in the north away from the Starks. He was one of only 2 truly consistent, formidable and cunning villains in the series. The Night King proved to be anticlimactic, and after Cersei blew up the Sept, the writers didn't know of anything coherent to do with her except drink wine and grimace from time to time, and it's sad because Lena Headey was previously phenomenal in the role. This isn't a slight to how great Joffrey's character was, but Tywin was the one and only big bad. He would do anything to protect the position of his house. What's funny about it, too, is that while you could look at him as a terrible father, forcing Cersei to marry Loras Tyrell and never fully accepting Tyrion as his son, his children really did need his iron hand. Without Tywin protecting them, a man who was greatly feared and had so much power, the rumors of Cersei and Jaime would have destroyed them both, and while more intelligent and skilled than Robert Baratheon, Tyrion was very self-indulgent as well. And while we might not agree with some of Tywin's decisions and we were horrified by his Red Wedding plot, you still have a grudging respect and understanding for the character. This simple scene of him melting down Ned Stark's sword ice alone was incredibly impactful. After the death of Tywin, the Lannisters fell apart. This would be expected from a narrative perspective due to his power and position, but unfortunately, it did with the writing of the characters as well. I spoke of Cersei already, but then there was Tyrion who became a buffoon, and Jaime's entire character arc was inexplicably shattered. So despite the mess made in latter seasons, there were still some Game of Thrones characters that were not shred to pieces.
The battle is over. We have won.
If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit the like button. And if you're interested in more on A Song of Ice and Fire and House of the Dragon, listen to Caraxes and subscribe. I want to thank everyone for watching, and I'll see you soon.